All right, hi everyone, and welcome back to ServeNow EDU. You might notice I'm not Trent Carlisle. I am Chad Jolly, so I'm the lead developer at Logical, the company behind ServeNow and Serve Manager. And I'll be filling in for Trent while he's out on vacation. So I think you'll find me better looking and more engaging, more intelligent, such things. So the recording of this webinar, it should be posted online in the next few days in the EDU section of ServeNow.com. We'll shoot out an email for you as well when that comes out. And you can also view these on YouTube and in iTunes. And then as Jared's going along, we'll get to him in a few minutes. We'll take questions, and let's use the questions panel in the GoToWebinar widget, the control panel thing. So type them in there, and I'll keep an eye on that and interrupt Jared as we're going along. So yeah, so our guest today is Jared Correia. He is the CEO of Red Cave Law Firm Consulting. So they offer law firm business management consulting and technology services for solo and small law firms. Red Cave also works with legal institutions and legal-facing corporations to develop programming and content. So Jared's a former practicing attorney, and he's been advising lawyers and law firms for over a decade now. He's a regular presenter at local, regional, and national events, I think most recently at the ABA Tech Show. He regularly contributes to legal publications like The Lawyerist, and he also hosts a podcast called the Legal Toolkit, sorry, which is produced by Legal Talk Network, which is our sister company here. So Jared, thanks for being here. And anything else you'd like them to know? Otherwise, just take it away.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Chad. I think you're doing an enviable job filling in for Trent here. Hopefully Trent doesn't stay on vacation too long because he's going to be in trouble. Thanks everybody out there for listening, whether you are doing that live or whether you are doing that in an archive fashion on YouTube. Chad pretty much covered what it is I do. I am a business management consultant for lawyers and law firms. I do that on a subscription basis, and I also provide technology services, including IT management. If you want to find out more about what I do, I'm not going to belabor this point because we're here to talk about the cloud. You can look me up at redcavelegal.com. That's my website, redcavelegal.com. And be sure to listen to the podcast that Chad mentioned, which is published by Legal Talk Network. It's called The Legal Toolkit. It's a good show. We take on a different topic every month, and it's all about business management issues. And just so you know, you see me wearing headphones, and you see this fine microphone right here, all courtesy of the Legal Talk Network. So let's jump into it. And as Chad said, we can make this as interactive as you want it to be. Send those questions in. I am very comfortable answering questions as they come in. I can go through my slides, or we can make this very free form. I'm on the East Coast, so I have until about 6 o'clock, and you can figure out your own time zone because I'm terrible at that. But we'll jump into this and send the questions in. So I advise law firms on a regular basis about using cloud technology. And law firms, as I think most small businesses are unsure exactly of what the cloud is and does. They know everybody's doing it. They don't quite know how to get into it themselves. So I think cloud technology is really useful for small businesses for a number of reasons, which I'll get into, not the least of which is you can finally get rid of some of your hardware and kick your server to the curb. So I get a lot of questions from people in relation to the cloud. And part of it, I think, is the way that this terminology has developed. So I once had a guy email me, and he said, I want to start using the cloud. I'm not using it right now. And he sent me an email from a Gmail account, which is a cloud-based email system. So I said, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is you have no idea what the cloud is. The good news is that you're already on it. So I think people are touched by these services in ways that they don't necessarily know about or don't necessarily expect. So to start off with, what you see in front of you is not the cloud, at least not in terms of what we're talking about. This was the old cloud, like before the Industrial Revolution. You notice how it's white and fluffy and not necessarily dark. The cloud we're talking about is this. So this notion that these services are a cloud makes them sound ephemeral, makes them sound like there's not a lot of substance behind it. But literally, all the cloud is someone else's server. So when you're using cloud-based technology or software as a service, you may have heard that terminology as well, SaaS. What you're essentially doing is renting space on somebody else's server. A lot of companies use Amazon servers, some use Google servers. There are server farms out there that look quite like this. So instead of having one server in your business space and having the need for a business space to place that physical server, what you're doing is you're just utilizing someone else's physical space, someone else's physical server, and essentially renting space on it. It's the difference between rent to own. And if you own a home, you know that there are advantages of living in a house, but there are disadvantages as well. If you live in a house, you have more control. But if you live in a house, there are more associated fees in terms of upkeep. And it's very similar when you're talking about cloud-based software versus traditional physical software. You've got obligations to keep in terms of the applications that you use on your own device or the physical hardware that you maintain in your office. With respect to the cloud that you're renting, you just pay a monthly fee, and that's it. So I think the rental versus property ownership analogy is pretty keen as far as this is concerned, and I think that brings it home for most people. But that's all the cloud is, rental space on a server. So there are a lot of advantages, to my mind, in cloud-based technology, both for law firms and who I consult with on a regular basis, and small business owners in general, including process servers. I'll outline some of those advantages now, but let me, before I do that, step back for a second and talk some more about some of the terms I just referenced. So the idea of software as a service, which I talked about, is a software application that doesn't live on your computer, that doesn't rest on your device. So it is not attached to your hardware in any way. It's available on the internet in the cloud. So moving a traditional software model to the cloud and being able to service it. And I think that's one of the key components as well. So when you're talking about systems like this, you've got vendors who are doing all the updates necessary, making sure the technology is there as far as security is concerned, applying encryption when necessary. A lot of that stuff becomes automated. And that's advantageous to small business because they don't have to pay those costs. They don't have to worry about that anymore. It used to be that you bought a software and it cost like several $1,000s, and then you would wait until the end of the year to get an update disk so you could make changes to the software and make it so that it was accessible for the new year. Those updates are taking place automatically now, which is tremendously useful. Another term you may hear is DaaS, and that is desktop as a service. So in that case, you're not aggregating several different cloud tools that you just utilize on your own through various logins. You have one login, and you're offloading your entire traditional desktop to a vendor. So you could have a desktop that only has one link to an internet browser. You get on the internet browser, you go to your login page, you log in, and then you have access to all your applications, which are managed by that provider. So you're not even paying subscriptions directly anymore. You're paying the provider who's paying for your subscriptions and who's also taking care of data backup and security. And you literally have no physical applications on your computer. You don't necessarily have to have any hardware outside of the device you use to access the internet. A lot of folks aren't ready to go that route yet. What I see most law firms doing and what I see most small businesses doing is cobbling together like 3 or 4 SaaS cloud-based software tools that they're using, sometimes integrated with each other to better manage their practices and better manage their businesses and to be more efficient. So let's get into some of the specific advantages that exist with respect to the cloud. I think 2 of the major ones are flexibility and mobility. So one of the key components here is that using an internet-based software allows you to be device agnostic. And what I mean by that is you don't necessarily care which device you're using anymore. You can use a tablet, you can use a smartphone, you can use a laptop, you can use a desktop, you can use some hardware that hasn't even been invented yet. You can wait until we all get chips in our heads and use that. But those tools are all available for you. All you need is an internet connection. And I would advise that you need an internet connection, but you also need a secure internet connection. That's important as well, because you don't want to open yourself up to potentially getting hacked. And most small business owners who are at least a little savvy about this will have a protected internet connection that they use. So that's tremendously advantageous. The advantage I see that lawyers are bringing to bear are when they're going to court for the day. And court scheduling is impossible to predict. So if you're going to court for a day and you will only have your smartphone accessible to you, you can access all your information from your smartphone, make all your updates from the smartphone, and you don't necessarily have to tote around a laptop anymore, which a lot of us used to have to do. You don't even necessarily have to tote around a tablet. And all the major providers at this point also have applications that are available via smartphones, via tablets. So you can truly work from anywhere as long as you can get online in a secure fashion. So wherever you have the internet, you can work. This opens up all kinds of possibilities, obviously. You can take more vacations if you're willing to take working vacations. You could go away to your second home, for example, and continue to work from there. The software resides where you do. And it's really freeing when you get to that point of being untethered. We started having devices with longer battery life so that you need to plug in as much anymore. Now what you see is you can take the devices anywhere and get to the software you need. And to be perfectly honest with you, many of the software applications are very similar to what they used to be. You're basically offloading a local application onto the cloud. So using Microsoft Office 365, for example, is very similar to using Microsoft Office 2016. And it gives you all the advantages of cloud-based software. So you can be device agnostic. You can work wherever you're online. And you can also add software integrations, which is helpful. To give a typical example from the legal field, there are products out there called law practice management software systems, and they're relational databases, essentially, which will allow you to add clients and all the related information about that client to one holistic system. So you've got emails, you've got calendars, appointments, tasks, you've got workflows if you have those, notes, phone call records, text, everything that attaches to the client file, documents, goes into this one database. But what's also helpful is that you can integrate with other systems. So you can push out time and billing information to an accounting software. You can send out tasks to an email system and sync your calendars there. And those integrations are really helpful because you can continue to use the basic products that you have traditionally used also in the cloud, and you can link them together. So this ability to create integrations off of what are called APIs, which are how these links are built within basic systems, is really helpful in terms of a business or practice, because everything is now stitched together. You don't necessarily have 5 separate logins that you're going to have to use on a daily basis. You're not going to have to manually transfer information via a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet. It's all going to be tied together nicely, and you can link these systems far more efficiently in the cloud than you could with traditional local applications. The other thing that I saw, yes.
And I'm not sure if you're going to go into this more, the API stuff. With ServeNow, which is a software as a service, as Jared was saying, SAS.
I've heard of it, yes.
Yeah, that's good stuff. We integrated with Zapier, which is something that aggregates all of these services together. And the way we kind of frame it is like you can almost build features into some of these applications that don't exist, but that you want. Like, hey, when I do this, send an email to this person. And yes. It's like a way to customize all of this. These 4, 5, 6 services that you're using, customize them, make them do whatever you want, and it kind of makes the software your own, and you can come up with some super beneficial workflows and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So I think Chad is right that the Serve Manager example is really useful here because you can craft the type of system you want. There are default options in any of these programs, including in Serve Manager, I'm sure. Um, but the trick here is that you can use what you want when you want it. You can tie it all together, and you really have more flexibility in building out the type of software program you want. So the trick, I think, is choosing a baseline software product that you're going to use, which is going to manage like most of what you do, like Serve Manager, for example, and then you tie it to the other integrations. So it's not the case anymore where you're using a software that has 9 features and you want it to have 13 features. Well, for those other 4 features, you just tie them in with other products. Another advantage here, which is really useful, is you can start to develop online processes and workflows. And a lot of small businesses have problems. Have problems with staff and overseeing staff and delegating appropriately. Business managers need to be acting as business managers, and the rote work that gets done by secretaries, that gets done by paralegals in the legal industry, that stuff should be appropriately delegated so the managers can work to run the business, to take care of higher level issues, and to do the rainmaking, frankly. So it is far easier to use online products, in my opinion, than it is to use traditional desktop applications. The ability to utilize the systems as they exist is helpful. I'm talking about the default features that are available, but then you can tie in all these other applications. So if you wanted to tie in a workflow tool, you could do that. By allowing you to do that, you can share tasks with your team. You can assign tasks to team members. You can follow up on tasks with team members. You can make sure that everybody is on point, and you don't necessarily have to have a meeting to do that. Like when I used to work at small law firms, the way we would manage client files is we would have no clue what was going on with those client files unless somebody called us or unless we got a notice from the court. So like every Saturday morning, which sucked because nobody wants to work Saturday mornings, we would have a big meeting where everybody at the office is coming together and we're going through files one by one by one by one. That is horrible. Terrible way to spend a Saturday morning, let me tell you. Systems like these will allow you to develop workflows, will allow you to manage people through the system, and will automate notifications and follow-up. So you don't have to do as much of that heavy picking up files, looking at files, figuring out what's going on. The last thing I want to mention here in terms of the usefulness of the cloud is I like the e-commerce features that are now available on a lot of these online platforms. So I'm talking about electronic payment processing, which is super duper helpful if you run a small business. If you start using electronic payment processing and you haven't done it yet, versus I'm talking about taking a check and traditional payment methods, it is A, much easier to get people to actually pay you and pay you up front, and B, you get paid quicker. So a recent study done in the legal industry found that attorneys who were taking payment processing electronically were getting paid 38 days faster than those who were asking for traditional checks. The other piece of it too is that if you're asking people for a decent chunk of money, thank you. We got a little visit from my daughter there. She's
Uh-oh.
and you can allow your clients to set up their own payment plan. So this is important in legal. If you're asking for a retainer that's like $1,500 or $3,000, somebody may not be able to produce a banker's check for that amount, but they can certainly put that that payment on their credit card and pay it off as they see fit, pay it down as it works for them.
Yeah, we added Stripe payments into Serve Manager maybe about 8 months ago. And the folks that have adopted it have seen exactly that, Jared, at least major gains with how quickly they're getting paid. They're getting paid up front, which is totally unheard of for process servers at this point.
Yeah.
But they're just like, holy man, like we're spending so much less time, chasing people down, trying to get that check, dealing with bounce checks, all that sort of stuff. And even like folks doing like some private investigations, we've seen them taking kind of that retainer fee, which can be a big chunk up front.
Yes.
And it's a game changer once you start seeing just how quickly and easily it is to get paid.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where once you start doing it, you'll never go back. And I often have this experience when when I'm doing consulting, and I tell somebody, why don't you add a second monitor next to your laptop? And people just go wild over that. Electronic payment processing is the same thing. Once you start doing it, you will never go back to the old school method of processing.
Without a doubt, yeah. We had a lot of resistance from kind of the older school folks, like, why would I ever do that? And then one of them signed up kind of just like begrudgingly, you know, and a couple months ago we got an email like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to my business, you know?
No, it's true. I think people get wigged out about the fact that there's a fee for processing these kind of claims. But what I tell people to do is, like, the processing fee is really fairly small. So just add like $10 to your pricing to cover the processing fees. Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to charge people back for it, because then you look like you're nickel and diming them. But yeah, build it in.
Yeah, build it into your fee, and the convenience that you get is 10 times that fee, easily. You know.
Yeah.
It's easy to get hung up on that fee, but again, once you get past that and you start using it, most folks don't even think about it.
I mean, yes, it will become part of what you do, and you will adopt it, and you will love it. All right. Anybody got any questions? Send them in. But I'm going to go on. All right. Yet. I'm moving on then. The next thing I wanted to talk about was data management, which is really helpful in terms of documentation of what you're doing. You want to have a good record of what it is that you do. In legal circles, I advise attorneys on this because they have certain ethical obligations for keeping data in a specific way. But even in terms of small business owners, process servers, there are state laws in all the United States now at this point that regulate data security. And most of what that relates to is personal identifying data. So social security numbers, financial account numbers, state issued identification numbers like driver's license numbers. If you're maintaining those financial numbers plus somebody's name, you oftentimes have a requirement to encrypt that data. So one of the advantages of a lot of the cloud-based products, is that they're already featuring that encryption within the system. And that is a tremendous relief for a lot of small business owners, because they don't necessarily have to worry about it. All the information that you dump into the system is encrypted. And one of the ways that you know is if you look at the website address where you're at on the cloud-based software, if it says HTTPS instead of HTTP, then that means it's a secure website that you're looking at. Systems have client portals as well, where you can share information with clients in a secure, encrypted way, rather than sending somebody an email and then maybe editing a document 9 or 10 times, and that's your never-ending email chain, and you end up with like 15 different versions of a document. Having portals to be able to share it with clients, automating notifications, all in an encrypted, secure way is really helpful. Many products as well will have access controls, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide, but everybody's got to have a password. Everybody's got to have a secure password, and they may also have to have a second factor of authentication. So you have a passcode, for example, that gets texted to you on your phone to access your account every now and then. And the reason that's done is because while it is probably easier for someone to hack your oftentimes the other side of data, you've got an arc for what you do.
Jared, we're starting to lose you a little bit there. Like the last 10 seconds or so, you were cutting in and out. Maybe repeat that.
How about now? Am I good?
Yeah, you look good now.
Okay. Sorry. I live in the woods. So on occasion, the internet will cut out for like 10 seconds and then it'll come back.
Yep.
I have coyotes in the backyard, believe it or not. So the security is built in, which is really helpful. The other thing that I think is useful is you have an archive for all your data. So I talked about before how relational databases tie clients to specific data related to those clients. And that means that everything's in one place. So I run into a lot of law firms. They've got 7 documents in Dropbox, 5 documents in OneDrive, and then they have 3 documents that they're saving to their desktop directly. Using one of these cloud-based systems in the right way allows you to dump all your data in one place and connect it to specific clients. Having that ability to archive all your documents in one place is helpful in terms of efficiency. It's helpful in terms of documentation and covering yourself in case something happens that your client is upset about potentially. And it's also really useful to just be able to check in with your clients. So if you have a phone call with your client, you can take a look quickly at the file and get a good idea of what's going on. And you can pick up on specific items if you need to, all from the convenience of one dashboard. So that's a level of redundancy as well, because oftentimes the way these systems work is you've got a file that saves somewhere else. It's in Dropbox, but it's also in your cloud-based software as well. So you've now got a redundancy because you've got 2 places where that document is saved, and it may be synced. So we talked about integrations before. You may be able to sync 2 cloud databases. So you've essentially got 2 copies, and if you back that up, you've got a 3rd copy, and that is tremendously useful in terms of business continuance if there happens to be a disaster that affects your practice. People think that stuff like that is not going to happen, but it does. I will relay a quick story here. When I was in practice, it was me and several older attorneys, and one of the attorneys hated to do yard work. So every Saturday morning, he would come into the office to work because he knew that if he didn't, his wife would make him do something in the yard. So he used to like to get breakfast burritos. One day he got a breakfast burrito, wasn't feeling too good after his breakfast burrito, went to the bathroom, clogged the toilet, fell asleep under his desk. Toilet overflowed. The whole building caught on fire because the water hit a circuit breaker. Our law office burned down, basically. The doctor's office underneath us burned down. Firemen came in, thought this guy was dead. They started giving him mouth-to-mouth. He was just taking a nap. This is like a Wednesday when I walk into the office. So this stuff does happen. And when I was consulting, I'm outside of Boston. When I was consulting with attorneys after the Boston Marathon bombing, for example, there were offices that I worked with who were at the finish line. And the offices that were cloud-based were able to pick up, move to another location, and start working the next day. The offices that were not could not get into their space for upwards of 2 weeks because there was a federal investigation going on. Their practices basically shut down for 2 weeks, and some of those firms weren't able to recover. So having the ability to access all your data online, having the ability to access a full-scale repository of your data, having redundancies and backups will allow you to get set back up pretty much right away if you need to. And that's an advantage that you're not going to find with traditional tools. If you are involved in an issue that, or if there's a disaster that affects your office, you're in trouble if you're using local data. If you are in a space where your device has gone down and you're not device agnostic, you're in trouble. So the cloud, SaaS, it solves for a lot of those problems. Collaboration is easier online as well. So I talked about this a couple ways already. One way is delegating work appropriately. It's easier to delegate work with a cloud-based system where everybody can share data wherever they are. It's easier to have yourself be doing the high-level work and your staff be doing the general work that needs to be done to keep things going on a daily basis. You can share information with clients. You can share information with colleagues more easily. You can bring in those features that you like. So in terms of data management, the cloud is a real boon, especially when compared to 2 types of offices. Either that paper-based traditional office where there are just files everywhere, or the type of office that has some cloud-based systems, some local systems, and documents and information are scattered in 5 or 6 different programs. That's not what you want. So let's get back to this issue of access control for a little bit. I talked about the strength of passwords, and I'll talk a little bit more about that right now. If you're using cloud-based software, you still need to have strong passwords. So if you look at the 20 most common passwords that are still in use, numbers 1 through 5 are like password 123, password 1234, password exclamation point. You have to be thinking more clearly about the passwords that you're using. They have to have some level of strength. People will tell you that you could use special characters, numbers in replacement of letters, but you can also get pretty robust passwords if you don't do any of that stuff. My tactic is always to string together random combinations of words that no one would guess. And my passwords are very complex. I can get up to about 45 or 50 characters. I'm not using any special characters necessarily. I'm not using any numbers, but the passwords are complex enough that I have a very low likelihood of being hacked. The multiple factors of authentication are important as well, as I talked about. Add something to the password so that even if someone hacks your password, they need to have another device or another piece to access to be able to get at your information. And I should also say, in terms of security, it's good that you have these small devices that you can carry around now, like an iPad, like a smartphone. But it's bad because you can leave those things places. So you could leave your iPad in the back of a taxi cab, or you can leave your smartphone in the back of a limo on the way to the airport. What you want to be able to do is two things. You want to make sure that there is a password on three things, actually. You want to make sure that there's a password on that device so somebody can't just swipe and open it up. You also want to make sure that the information on that device is encrypted, or the device is encrypted itself. And lastly, you want to be able to remotely wipe that device. And when I say remotely wipe, what I mean is you want to be able to take all the data off of that device without actually physically having the device in your hands. You get that all set up, you're fairly secure. Now, the other piece of access control, which is useful, is the way a lot of these SaaS softwares work is you're buying licenses. So you buy seats, essentially. So the way these are priced out is everybody who is using the software, from the owner of a business to staff, has to have a license. They have to have a unique login. And that will reflect the bandwidth you're using. That will reflect how much data storage you have potentially, but everybody's got to have their own passwords, or everybody's got to have their own license. There are not going to be things, if you're a business owner, that you want staff members to see. Maybe you want to block out your financials so that nobody can take a look at your books except for you. In the legal field, sometimes attorneys have to be screened from certain cases because they're conflicted out, while attorneys in another part of the firm are not conflicted out. So you can set these systems up, and I think it's easier to do this on cloud-based systems than it was on traditional systems, where certain users are blocked from certain files, or certain users are blocked from viewing certain clients, or certain users are blocked from viewing certain reports. You can take an access control setting at a very granular level, and that's really helpful. You can do that with users specifically. And I think that is a great way to manage a system. And it sort of helps you to tread the line between adding everybody and getting everybody access to what they need, but also protecting the information that you want to protect for whatever legitimate reasons you want to do that. I talked a little about the client portals, about the third-party portals that are available on these systems. And I think that's important as well, because part of it is internal access and part of it is external access. One of the reasons you want to use cloud-based software is because it's easier to share with your team, but it may also be you may also be more easily able to share with partners, collaborators, clients, and the use of these third-party portals makes that really easy. So again, and to underscore this point, if you're using the right software, it can become a hub for everything that you do. And if there are features that you don't like, you add integrations to make sure that you've got the feature set that you want. And as Chad was talking about before, I think ServeNow is a great example of that. Typical online software management tool, plus additional features when and how you need them. Usability, I think, is also better in the cloud than it was back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I'm not talking about the Renaissance. I'm talking about like 10 years ago. It's striking to me. I started consulting with lawyers about 10 years ago, and the technology changes have been really striking. When I started out, I had many lawyers most of the lawyers I talked to were on Microsoft Office, and they were all using desktops, and they were all using local applications. 10 years later, I have so many more Mac attorneys than I ever had before. I have so many more attorneys who are willing to use cloud software than I've ever had before. People are going paperless. It's just over the last 10 years. There's more advances in play that are coming out, but just the usability of these systems is tremendously helpful. If you look at the way software was designed 10 years ago versus the way it's designed now, the interface is far more modern and far more intuitive than it used to be. It is much easier to step in and use a cloud-based software than it was to use a traditional local application. And that's going to save you time. That's going to increase your efficiency. That's going to make it more likely that you use a larger percentage of the software. I don't know that anybody out there uses like 100% of a software program. I think that's very unlikely. But if you can get from 10% to 40% just because of the usability of the system, then that's a win. So the modern interface is really helpful. The ease of sharing, as I talked about, is really helpful. The ability to customize is really helpful. So part of the usability is that you don't have to buy one product off the shelf necessarily. Those integrations that Chad talked about in terms of Zapier integrations, which is a popular way to yoke systems together. That's a great way to customize a system the way you want it to. Now, back in the day, when you wanted to have a local application that was customized, you were paying a consultant and you were being charged a fortune to make that happen. Now you get on Zapier, you add the applications that you want that feature into the system where those features that you want don't exist, and you've customized your own software. It's so much cheaper now to manage and run software than it's ever been before. There are those automatic updates, as I talked about as well. You're no longer in a position where you have to wait a year to get an update disk for a feature you want. Those are updated automatically. And I find at least that cloud-based vendors are more responsive to client needs than traditional local application vendors had been, because they had more control of what was happening back then. You had to wait for the update disk. You had to pay a lot of money to get started. Now, all these products are based on subscription applications. I'll talk about that in a second, but you're paying on a monthly basis, essentially. So those providers are motivated to make regular updates to keep you paying that subscription. So those updates are automated, as I said. They're done in the background, so you don't even notice them. But they're also more likely to hear your complaints or hear your features requests and add those and be responsive to you about how that process is coming along.
Yeah, Jared, as a software developer, I mean, the difference between delivering a local application versus something that is in the cloud, software as a service, is massive. And the biggest part of it, and the biggest part of why a lot of this is better, the interface, the sharing, and the customization, the updates, that sort of stuff, is that everyone's running the same version. And back in the day, you have someone on Office 2000, someone's still running Windows 95, someone, you have to keep this whole matrix of versions of your software running, and you spend all your time doing that rather than actually adding features in. So when you got this cloud-based software, everyone's running the exact same thing, and you can focus so much more on delivering, those feature requests and bug fixes, and yeah, you just push them out and it's done. It's probably happening right now in the room here.
Yes, it's literally happening right now somewhere in the country. And Chad knows more about this stuff than I do. I will candidly say I just talk nice. So the other thing I'll say before we leave this this piece of the presentation is I also think there are more robust support options than there ever used to be, mostly because there are more channels to access support. You've got knowledge bases online where you can get information about a product that you're using. You have the ability to chat with customer service representatives. You have the ability to pick up the phone and call somebody. You have the ability to email someone and get an email back. You have the ability to check in like 6 or 7 different ways if you have some information that you need. This is Gracie. Everyone say hello.
Hello, Chrissy.
About 15 minutes left. This is
Yep.
going to go viral, I promise you. So one of the other advantages about the cloud is that there are cost savings available, really helpful cost savings. Some of those cost savings are something that you're not going to see as a bottom line expense necessarily. So there is going to be efficiencies that you're adding because you're able to work more efficiently than you had before. You can better delegate, as I talked about. You can make sure that you can better delegate, as I talked about. You can make sure that the system is easier to use than your traditional systems. When you're able to do that, you're able to work faster and you're able to save money. You can also reduce the amount of hardware that you're paying for. So one of the problems I have with traditional tools is you've got people who are using hardware and they have a server that they bought for like $20,000 and then that server crashes. And then what they hear is, oh, to replace that server, I had to pay another $14,000 or $20,000. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to maintain hardware anymore. Nobody wants to replace the hardware. Nobody wants to be updating the hardware. Nobody wants to pay an IT person to manage the hardware, for example. So the issue is that that stuff is going to keep happening if you're relying on traditional tools. If you're using the cloud, what will happen is that all that stuff is going to be taken care of automatically behind the scenes without any hardware at all that you need. So the less hardware you have, the less you're going to pay to maintain it and the less you're going to pay to replace it. The subscription pricing model is really helpful as well. And I talked a little bit about this before. So in the old days, when you had to buy a software, you spent a lot of money up front. You may have had to hire a consultant to customize it. And now you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. The software is highly customizable, even for lay people, and you're paying by a subscription rate. So you're usually paying on a monthly or annual basis. And when you're paying on a monthly basis, the advantage of that is that you can pull the plug at any time. And when you can pull the plug at any time, that means your vendors are motivated to continue to update the product and to make it more workable. There was no similar motivation, or the motivation was far less urgent with respect to traditional software tools that were based in local applications. So the subscription pricing model actually allows vendors, forces vendors really, to deliver you a better product that's easier to use, which also adds to your efficiency. And I talk about this a lot in terms of my consulting. People don't realize how adding efficiencies will save you money because it's not truly affected in the bottom line. It's something that you can see. But I talked about before, getting a second monitor for your desktop is really helpful because think of how many times you open and close windows. If you can reduce that by half, you're saving time, you're saving money. The last piece of this is data storage. So one of the issues with traditional offices, traditional law firms, is that you have a paper-based practice. It's going to cost a lot more money to save physical documents than it's going to cost to save electronic documents. Online storage is super duper cheap. And using a paperless office model, storing as much as you can in the cloud, means that you're not going to have to set up shop somewhere. You're not going to have to dedicate your office or dedicate your attic to all the old client files that you have. I once had a lawyer that I was working with in sort of a podunk part of Massachusetts who actually bought an old storefront and he stored all his paper there. And that's all he used it for. It was just a piece of real estate sitting there that he was paying a lease on, that he was paying property taxes on, solely for the purpose of storing his documents because he didn't want to get rid of that. Move that to the cloud, cut your costs by a significant margin. All right. Got about 15 minutes left, I think. Does anybody have any questions before we go into the rules? If there are no questions, feel free to pop those into the question box and I'll answer those before I go. So the cloud, right? Is it within the rules? Yes, it is. There are state laws respecting data protection, data privacy, and those laws contemplate cloud-based tools. The trick is that you encrypt your sensitive data. And I talked about what sensitive data was previously. Certain names tied to certain specific numbers, social security number, financial account number, state issued ID number, almost universally. In terms of even the legal field, lawyers have started to, bar associations, have started to issue ethics opinions with respect to cloud-based tools. There are about 30 states that have now issued ethics opinions. Guess what? They've all said it's okay. The ethics rules for lawyers in most jurisdictions now reflect the use of technology and the lawyer's responsibility to secure the technology, the personal identifying data. That reflects the language in the state laws. So there's almost a cohesive system at this point where the state laws, the ethics rules are using the same language. So the state laws are what you have to worry about. But the fact that lawyers, a traditionally late adopting field, have adopted the cloud and feel as though it is effective when they have significant rules in place for ethics with respect to client confidentiality, I think is a big deal. So if you look at your local state law on data privacy, data protection, you'll see the requirements that you need to put into place in terms of securing your data. But that doesn't mean that the cloud is not okay to use. That just means that you need to secure your data on the cloud. And I think that's a best practice, even if there weren't any state laws. Is the software safe is a related question. Answer, also yes. Talked about a little this before, and I'm just going to rehash now and tell you how that makes the software safe. The ability to add strong passwords is helpful. The fact that many of these softwares are encrypted when you're online is helpful. The fact that you can add a second factor of authentication is helpful. Those are 3 barriers that you've stacked up against would-be data thieves. And the fact that you have data backup is helpful as well, because you can pull that data back if you need it, if it's compromised in some way. With respect to the modern softwares, you can even control the access of internal personnel, which is tremendously helpful, because what happened in small businesses previously was, how many times have you heard the story of the secretary who decides to embezzle all the firm's money because she's the only person who has a password or only person who has information about the bank account? What happens then is what happens now is that person's potentially locked out from that information. The controls, I think, are actually easier in the cloud than they were to apply in traditional business settings. So all this stuff inures to the fact that you can use the cloud, but you should use it safely, and there are easy ways to do it. But that's not the end of the story. A lot of the systems include security protocols that make it safer to use these systems, but there are also things that you can do as a user to make these systems safer. I talked about strong passwords. You can create passwords that are not weak passwords, that are not traditional passwords, that are not password. I think at one point, like, Jessica Alba's phone got hacked, and the reason it got hacked is because she used her dog's name as her password. And, like, I'm sure Jessica Alba's dog's name has been posted on TMZ at some point, so somebody found that, tried it as a password, and used it. So it's not just about not selecting passwords. It's about having an idea that some of the information that's publicly available online may be found as well, even for some security questions. You know how some of those security questions for systems ask you, like, what's your pet's name? What's your mother's maiden name? Some of those records are available online. So you want to be thinking about that as well. What I often advise law firms to do, which you could adopt in a small business, is I tell people to make sure that they have a password policy in place. What is the recommended method for creating strong passwords within the particular business? How often do passwords need to be changed by employees? That stuff should be written down so that you could follow it. If it's not written down somewhere, you're not going to follow it. Factors of authentication we talked about. I won't dive into that again. One thing I will say is that at some point in the near future, much of that will probably be done by fingerprint, just because everybody's fingerprints are unique. So that is here now, but it's not widely used. 2 more things I'll talk about. One is this idea of pre-encryption. So when you're using a lot of these SaaS systems, one of the ways they make things convenient for you is you upload your data to the system, and then the data is encrypted. But who holds the encryption key? The system itself. So that vendor can access your information. I mean, most don't have nefarious plans with respect to your data. And you know, as a small business, you're potentially less likely to be a target of hacks than, say, the NSA. But you can also use a method called pre-encryption, where you use something like Microsoft Word or you use something like Adobe Acrobat to encrypt a document, and then you upload it to the system. What that does is you have applied encryption to the document. You know the password, but the system does not know that encryption password. You can do that manually, or there are tools. An example out there is Cloudfogger that you can use to encrypt documents before you upload them to another system. That tactic is called pre-encryption. And if you're worried about a vendor releasing your data, that's one way that you could better secure it. Although I think that worry is overblown in a lot of cases. There are also tools out there, say if you're a Dropbox user, for example, there are zero-knowledge databases out there, like SpiderOak is a popular one, which will encrypt your data, but won't have the information in their system about how to unencrypt the data. They send that to you. So they don't know how to get at your data. The problem with that is that you are then obligated to remember how to unencrypt your data. And if you forget, then guess what? Your vendor doesn't have the information either. So a lot of this is weighing the balance between security and convenience. The last thing I'll say here is that one of the things that is really helpful about a lot of these systems that have messaging capabilities is that you are avoiding email. So the problem with traditional email is that not everyone uses the same email system. Some people are on Gmail. Some people are still on AOL, believe it or not. What that means is that when one email goes from one email account to another, it could go through like 15 different servers before it gets there. That information is exposed at that point. So email encryption tools are available, but the problem is because they can't guarantee that it's going to go from one email account type to a separate email account type that's run by the same company. You're always going to a secure third-party inbox to avoid those additional servers. What that means is that your clients are going to need a separate password to access that inbox. A lot of clients don't want to do that. So using the right tools, the right cloud-based tools, will enable you to avoid email. You could have internal communications in the office, and the advantage of that is that the problem with email is that literally anyone can email you if they find your email address online or wherever, or they get it from somebody else. With respect to private communication systems like Slack, which is gaining in popularity even with law firms, it's an invite-only private messaging system. So using that, using client portals, you'll be able to avoid email and keep some of that sensitive data off of email, which also means that you don't have to then figure out how to encrypt your email, which could be a pain. Okay. I have to say, my daughter walked off with the iPad. She's probably playing some preschool game, so I have no idea what time it is. That's my last slide. 5 minutes? All right. So here's the deal. What are you waiting for? Obligatory Ron Burgundy reference. It's time to get onto the cloud. All right, so I got 5 minutes left. So I can't believe that no one has any questions. So I'm going to pause here for a sec for questions if they come in.
Yeah, we can wait for some questions, and I'll just chime in the silence here.
Yeah, go for it. With
regard to the password stuff, I think it's obligatory now to use some sort of password manager. They're out there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Within our, and like you were saying with the password policies and stuff, in our company we use one of the password managers called 1Password. There's KeePass, LastPass. There's all sorts of them out there. They're great. They sync onto your phone anywhere you go, and basically what it allows you to do is to create a strong, unique password for every site that you're at. And I think that's one of the biggest things about passwords is not reusing them.
Yes.
Because, you know, like when you hear about these data breaches, like, oh, LinkedIn passwords are out there. You know, no one really wants to go in and update your LinkedIn profile, but they're going to take that username and password and go try and get an Uber with it or buy their Netflix subscription or whatever, you know. So if you're reusing those passwords, it's not necessarily about the service explicitly that you're on. It's when those get out in the open, they're going to go and try these at the more substantial, you know, your bank account, that sort of thing. So I would strongly suggest using a password manager. It looks like we got a question here.
And that's a great point because a lot of people just use the same password over and over again, so they don't have to memorize them.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And that's where you get into trouble with these data breaches, because it's not if, but it's when.
Absolutely.
You know, so it looks like Donna has a question, and this is an interesting thing too. There's like kind of personal clouds now, and she's asking, you know, are the clouds that sit on your desk anymore as secure as someone using or is using someone else's server? So I'm guessing she's talking about a physical device that acts as if it's like a Dropbox, where it's accessible over the cloud, but it's actually physically sitting on your computer.
Yeah, there are a lot of cool tools out there. One that I find to be interesting, and those, I don't know if Donna's question is requires a response, or if she's just saying that there are tools out there like that. There are more options out there, and the options are proliferating every day. So there's one company out there called what are they called? Now I can't recall the name of the company. Something Monkey. Like there's a million companies out there named after monkeys right now. But this what this company does is they have a physical backup device, which looks just like a little white cone that you keep in your office, but it also backs up to the cloud. So yeah. So do you know the name of this, Chad? Because it's killing me.
Yeah, it's killing me too. I can't remember what it is.
It's something Monkey.
Of course, as soon as we hang up here, I'll remember.
I know. I don't want to get off my screen, but yeah, there are private clouds, there are virtual servers, there are hybrid cloud tools out there. There are an array of software tools that you can look at. So that's the thing. Like I think a lot of small business owners aren't fully prepared to dive headlong into the cloud. And if you're not, that's okay. There are hybrid options that you can use too.
Yeah, I think that's what Donna's getting at. She's saying she bought a portable one from Sam's Club. And I guess what I would add there is, yeah, those are great. And especially, but it does come with that same set of problems of having your own physical computer sitting here. If you've got a breakfast burrito incident or a coffee spill or whatever, you're going to want to make sure that that data is backed up somewhere else, which I'm assuming most of these private cloud things are going to do out of the box. But you're going to want to make sure that. And then the standard stuff with, you know, making sure that the connection that thing is using is secure. And yeah, so I would say it's a decent option, like you were saying, for people that aren't ready to jump in fully to do that.
Space Monkey, that's what it's called. I remembered.
Yeah.
Space Monkey is hybrid local backup and cloud backup. So if you spill your coffee on your physical backup device, there's still a cloud backup, all through one provider.
Exactly. And I would, yes. So Donna, I would definitely make sure that that backup is happening and that it's automated, that it's nothing that you have to deal with, because once you have to start dealing with backups, they're not going to happen. And Gracie even knows that.
Right. Well, so I think I'm at an hour because the nursery rhyme video is over. But I can, if anybody's got any other questions, I can take them. And if not, we can end here. That's fine with me too.
Yep. You know, I had one note written down that after you said the story about the guy with the storefront.
That's a true story.
You know, in 10 years ago, that was totally normal. That seems like a thing you would do. And today, and especially probably 5 years from now, that's going to look irresponsible. You know, like, I mean, fire, anyone could walk into that office, throw a rock through the window or whatever, and start digging through data, you know.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I see is like people telling me their physical office is safer than the data they would have in the cloud. But there are very few law offices I see, and probably very few small businesses, where there's not the ability for someone to just walk in, swipe a file, and leave. How would you ever track it? Most small businesses have no way to figure that out. It's far safer to be on a device somewhere.
Without a doubt. Okay, Vicky actually has an interesting question. Maybe we'll end with this one. It's 4 right now. So she's saying most clouds require a person to stay with that company. And if you decide to leave the company, perhaps the prices rise, then they hold your info hostage. What can you do in that instance? So I'm thinking she's saying, like, say if you left Dropbox and for some reason they kept all your data and didn't allow you to get back to it. That's a bad example because they don't do that, but say.
But if they did. No, there are, it's a great question, actually. So this is tricky. In the first instance, I would say make your choice wisely, because even though you can move, you don't want to move. It's a pain because data transition is not something you want to get into. It's very expensive, and then building those connections is very difficult to do. Now, none of these companies are going to hold your data hostage. But the tricky part of it is that these are all relational databases for the most part, and they work in different ways. So any company will tell you, oh, if you need your data back, we'll send it to you via a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet. And legitimately they will do that, but then the problem is, how do you get that data into your next system? It's kind of like the problem with email, like I was talking about.
Yeah.
Nobody's using the same email system. Nobody's necessarily using the same cloud-based system. So reconstructing the data points in relation to the clients is really the difficult part. They'll give you the data back, but it'll be a dump, and then you need to figure out how to add it to the new system, and that may take hiring a consultant. So yes, I would say choose wisely, vet the providers, which a lot of the state laws actually require you to do now, and look for a company that's stable, whose prices are stable, is going to be around for a while. Because although you can move, although they will give you your data back, it's not going to be in a highly useful form.
Yeah. And y'all are lawyers too, right? Read those terms, see what's out there.
Yes. Terms of service level agreements, make sure you know what you're getting into.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That the decision up front is important. Don't jump into these things, on a whim. Definitely do the research.
Yes.
Jared, it looks like that's all we got, and I know you got to get back to Gracie. So thanks so much for.
This is good. We're just hanging here. Yeah, my pleasure.
Just to recap, this will be available. I think in a couple days on ServeNow. It'll be available on YouTube and iTunes. And we'll shoot out an email when that's ready. And I think that's about it. I lost my closing notes, but I think that's about what we got. Thanks so much, Jared. You got anything else to end with?
Yeah, check out ServeNow if you haven't already.
Yeah, nice. All right, thanks everyone. We're going to wrap this up. And thanks again, Jared. And we will see you guys in about a month. I think we'll have another one of these coming out. Bye, Grace.
Thank you.